America and other free and open societies face crucial challenges and opportunities abroad that affect security and prosperity at home. This is a series of conversations with guests who bring deep understanding of today's battlegrounds and creative ideas about how to compete, overcome challenges, capitalize on opportunities, and secure a better future. I am HR McMaster. This is Battlegrounds.
On today's episode of Battlegrounds, our focus is on the Middle East and the archipelago kingdom of Bahrain, a U.S. security partner and the longtime headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. Our guest, His Excellency Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid Al Khalifa, is the Bahraini ambassador to the United States. A member of the Al Khalifa family and son of the Bahraini Interior Minister, Sheikh Abdullah began his career as the head of educational affairs of the Royal Family Council. He later served as Director of Education and the Social Affairs Directorate. In 2010, Bahraini King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa appointed Sheikh Abdullah to be governor of Bahrain's Southern Directorate, the largest of Bahrain's 4 directorates. Sheikh Abdullah became ambassador to the United States in July of 2017, a post in which he continues to promote security cooperation and economic exchange between the U.S. and Bahrain. Humans have inhabited the small island kingdom of Bahrain, which means 2 seas, for thousands of years. Bahrain has served as a trade hub, linking civilizations from Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley to the Phoenicians and the Levant, to the Nile Valley and Egypt. Persian dynasties ruled Bahrain under the Iranian Achaemenid dynasty from the 6th to the 3rd centuries BC, and from the 3rd to the 7th centuries AD. Arab armies established an Islamic empire in the Middle East in the 7th and 8th centuries. Persian, Omani, and Portuguese forces later seized control of the islands of Bahrain. In 1783, Ahmed al-Fatah led the Bani Utbah tribe to win Bahrain from Persia and instituted the Al Khalifa family's rule. In 1830 and 1861, the British government signed treaties with Bahrain, and Bahrain functioned as a British protectorate. Bahrain was the first Gulf country to discover oil, and the Bahrain Petroleum Company marshaled the country into an era of major oil and gas production and economic industrialization. In the late 1960s, Britain reduced its presence in the Gulf, and Bahrain, along with other Persian Gulf emirates, sought sovereignty. Following the unanimous passing of UN Resolution 278, Bahrain became independent on December 16, 1971. Bahrain finalized the first of 2 constitutions in 1973, during the reign of Sheikh Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa from 1961 until his death in 1999. Bahrain joined global and regional coalitions, including the UN, the IMF, the WHO, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Bahrain participated in Operation Desert Storm in Iraq as a member of the coalition and signed a defense cooperation agreement with the United States. His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa came to power in 1999 and ushered Bahrain into an era of reform. In 2002, Bahrain amended the constitution to become a constitutional monarchy and held its first local and parliamentary elections in 3 decades. That same year, the U.S. designated Bahrain a major non-NATO ally. In 2011, the Arab Spring protests shook the Middle East and catalyzed anti-government uprisings and armed rebellions throughout the region. The protests spread to Bahrain, but the Al Khalifa family remained in power. Bahrain is a vital U.S. defense, security, and trade partner and is working to diversify its economy away from oil. We welcome Sheikh Abdullah to discuss security partnerships, Bahrain's outlook on regional security, and the impacts of shifting alliances throughout the Middle East.
Ambassador Abdullah Al Khalifa, marhaba. I've enjoyed the hospitality of you and your family many times, and it's a privilege to welcome you to Battlegrounds.
No, thank you so much. This is a great opportunity. I applaud you for what you continue to do, General, and I welcome the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ambassador. You know, you're from a small but very important country in a perfect position to help us learn more about the Middle East and the Gulf region. And of course, every year you host the Manama Dialogue, which is a forum that brings people together with differing viewpoints. And I've always been impressed at the Manama Dialogue that you really have a vibrant discussion. So I'd like to ask you just to begin, could you talk with our viewers about what were the most significant issues raised this year, but really also do you think are the most pressing issues for Bahrain and the region more broadly?
Absolutely, General. If you'll allow me just to give a very quick overview as to the Bahrain US relationship, because I think it's worth noting that this relationship is a very deep historic relationship. It's been steady for a very long time now. Last year, we celebrated 50 years of formal relations, but informally, it goes back a century. People-to-people ties started out, and it evolved into not the obvious defense-security relationship that a lot of people presume it to be, but a truly multifaceted relationship that has touched the lives of many people on both sides. So we've always focused on, yes, the defense and the security, but the economic ties, the cultural ties, the diplomatic cooperation, all the work that happens quietly between our two countries to ensure the safety and the security of our people has really forged a great example of partnership between our two nations. I'm talking about a country that has pegged its currency to the US dollar, a country that has prioritized its business dealings with the US as opposed to other nations from around the world. We've aligned our military capabilities with the US. We have housed the US naval facilities since 1947. And all of that really brought our people closer and presented really unique opportunities that have benefited us all. But regarding the Manama Dialogue, yeah, I was there a week ago, and it was really interesting to see that many of the participants talked about security, but in a broader context. So there were the obvious concerns, the obvious challenges, but also there were issues that governments are facing around the world, especially in light of what we faced 2 years ago with COVID, what we're facing up until now with supply chain issues, wars and other theaters that are making raw materials difficult to obtain and having an effect on our very complicated lives these days. But the conversation was very wide in terms of what we heard. But I would say the resounding probably message that we heard in terms of security and defense was related to a neighbor of us, which shouldn't come as a surprise. Iran has always been part of the conversation at the IISS conferences in Bahrain. But this time we've heard it louder from our European partners as opposed to just countries in the region. There's a significant concern with the recent behavior of Iran in the region and the unpredictability.
And just for our viewers, of course, you're talking about the murder of Mahsa Amini and then the murder of over 400 protesters now, as people have expressed their outrage at the brutality of the theocratic dictatorship there. But please continue, Ambassador.
No, absolutely. I mean, for those that look back historically at what Bahrain has encountered because of Iran's intervention in the domestic affairs of Bahrain, it's been very challenging. We have a very unique demographic in Bahrain. We have people from different ethnic backgrounds, from different religions. It's a very open society. And it goes against every rule that the Islamic Republic wants to see in a country that neighbors them. And that has been a point that has created a lot of friction but we have been able to deal with it over a period of time. We've been able to double down on our efforts in inclusion, in peaceful coexistence, and tolerance, and that has aggravated the regime, and it puts us in a very difficult situation.
And Ambassador, you're talking about this already, but I think our viewers will be interested in really, what the king has done, what governmental reforms have been put in place to encourage the participation you're alluding to, and how you feel now about the inclusion of all different communities in government, and the internal security situation after having gone through some difficult times in recent years.
Well, here's the thing, General. We will continue to advocate for the participation of everyone in the political process. We just had elections 2 weeks ago, and we had a 73% voter turnout. There are those that were represented from different backgrounds, different faiths, and there is a true belief in the political reform system that was developed since 2002. That is going to continue with a lot of momentum. And as it continues, we will always see those that will try to slow it down. Now, for the past 40 years, again, because demographic, we're talking about a 1.5 million population, half of whom are Bahraini, the other half are from all over the world. We want to ensure that we continue to have a very open and dynamic community, one that is very similar to communities in the West, very open-minded, very forward-thinking, and with the objective of creating the highest quality of life for our citizens and those that choose to live in Bahrain. Iran sees this diversity as an opportunity to foment sectarian divide. Now, we never look at the percentages because of a single fact: Bahraini first. There are a lot of homes with parents coming from different sects. And so where do you classify the kids, right? I think that as we move forward, we will continue to see Iran challenge what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, we're probably the only country that has pushed back this hard. We're the only country that has succeeded in doing so. And we have a success story to highlight, and that's what we're doing here in the US and in other parts of the world.
Ambassador, I'm sure this was a topic of discussion at Manama. Could you maybe share with our viewers your perspective of the region more broadly as it relates to Iran's effort to, I think, to accelerate a cycle of sectarian violence that allows Iran to try to keep the Arab world perpetually weak, and weakness among its Arab neighbors is what Iran wants, obviously, to extend its influence in the region, and ultimately as well to threaten Israel, as part of that effort to weaken Arab states. So how do you see the trends in the region? In Iraq, where I've spent a lot of time, as you know, and I have, I've got a soft spot in my heart for Iraqis who have been subjected to brutality and violence from, Takfirin, Salafi jihadists, as well as Shia militias and terrorist groups supported by Iran. And then in Yemen, we see Iran's support for the Houthis and the perpetuation of that humanitarian catastrophe there. The continued episodes of mass homicide in the Syrian civil war, perpetrated in large measure by an Iranian proxy army, the support for Hezbollah and Hamas and the threats to Israel. I mean, so Iran is playing clearly a destructive role in the region. How do you see the trends in this fitna that they've been able to participate in perpetuating? What's your prediction about the future?
Well, I first think that the Iranian regime has tried the exact same formula in multiple parts of the Middle East. They have succeeded in some, and it has been challenging for them in others. But the resounding fact is that we've started to uncover this formula. We've started to realize how they operate, and we've started to put it in front of the eyes of many around the world. Creating a government within a government has always been an objective. If you have a strong government that looks out for the security interests of all people, for the benefit of all people within a country, that doesn't play well. And that's what we try to do. That's what we continue to do. And it becomes more and more challenging for them. Now, sect has a role in this, but then again, we shouldn't look at the entire sect as followers of the Iranian regime, because that's also a misconception sometimes that we have here in the West. There are some loud voices on the extremes that might give the impression that there's bigger control over this. And when I talk about the extreme, I talk about the extreme on multiple fronts. So it's not just one sect, but all sects, all religions. If extremism becomes our enemy that we will time and again focus on and deter, then we're in a better standing. And that's what we have done. So as we continue down the path of openness, of inclusion, it becomes more and more evident for our people that they have got to be somewhere in the middle, as opposed to on the extremes. And that has really worked. Now, Iran's actions towards Bahrain, especially in the past few decades, have really been unpredictable. We never know what might come next. And what we have seen is whenever there's a bigger challenge domestically in Iran, we'll see a spillover effect in the region as a diversion. That diversion, we worry, might have a direct effect on us. So what we're doing right now is we're monitoring the situation in Iran, and we're looking at how it might affect us, basically. How can we maintain our guard as things get a little bit more complicated on their domestic front?
And as you know, security in the region does require a lot of multilateral cooperation. And as you know, for many years, the United States had great hopes for the Gulf Coordinating Council, the GCC, and especially in the security realm. How are the trends in the GCC today? Of course, I remember when I was National Security Advisor, we had the so-called Gulf crisis between really the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis on one side, and the Qataris on the other, and countries like yours trying to mediate, Kuwait trying to mediate. How's the relationship today, and how is the relationship doing in connection with security cooperation?
Well, for the past year or so, we have seen much more cooperation on the GCC level. It is our hope that we continue down that path of coordination, because that's the whole essence of the GCC. You know, I think COVID really taught us a lesson. It taught us how vulnerable we are if we stand alone. We need to depend on one another, but then we also have to be very selective in who we choose as partners. And the more like-minded countries come together, the easier they will achieve their goals. And so within the GCC, we're hoping to get over this hurdle very soon as we move forward to a more challenging time. Oil is not going to be the driver of energy for long. And so the diversification away from oil has already started. And without the collaborative efforts of the GCC, it's just going to be another challenge that we will have to overcome. So we're in a different state. We're talking on a technical level, we're talking on the leadership level. But the landscape in the Middle East has also changed dramatically in the past 2 years. These geopolitical shifts are creating maybe differences in foreign policies towards some countries in the region and outside of the region, and that creates another level of complication that we'll have to very delicately deal with.
Well, Ambassador, one of the most significant developments in recent years has been the Abraham Accords, and I guess even negative experiences like Iran's proxy wars that they've been fomenting in the region can have positive consequences. Because I think one of the big drivers of this was, I think, a really strong vision by the Trump administration to help broker this agreement, but really the realization among countries in the region that they have to work together to counter the threat from Iran. Could you comment really on Bahrain's role in the Abraham Accords, your observations as it was coming together, and what you think the prospects are for cooperation under the Abraham Accords?
So, General, we're 2 years in. We have over 40 different MOUs that were signed thus far. We have an ambassador in Tel Aviv. We have an Israeli ambassador in Bahrain. The idea here is to primarily target economic prosperity and to come up with a future that is more sustainable for both our peoples. And so with direct flights twice a week, we have already witnessed a surge in Israeli tourism. I mean, they come to Bahrain not only for sporting events, but to visit the only operating synagogue in the region. It's been there for over 5 decades now. They come to Bahrain to interact with the Jewish Bahrainis that have lived in Bahrain for many years, that have been part of the government for many years, that have represented Bahrain abroad in a number of instances. And for us, it was important to build that bilateral relationship as we move forward. But what happened in the beginning of this year was also a focus on the multilateral efforts, where the Negev Forum was established. This was done very quickly, but it brought together the Bahrainis, Americans, Israelis, UAE, Morocco, were all part of the Accords, but then Egypt as well. So it just comes to show that there's a genuine effort to look at some of the challenges and come up with opportunities that will bring us closer together. I still remember on the sidelines of that forum, we were able to launch what is called the Joint Warm Peace Strategy. And the idea behind it was to show that, yes, we understand that within the next couple of years, there might be some challenges ahead. But at the end of the day, we are in this for the long run. We want to find ways that we can bring our peoples closer together. So there were certain areas of mutual interest that we focused on: trade, healthcare, sustainable energy, education, and tourism. And as a result of that, there were multiple working groups that were formed. Bahrain hosted the steering committee back in June, and those 6 working groups were formed: clean energy, education and coexistence, food and water security, health, regional security, and tourism. Now, these working groups are being established. It seems like Bahrain and the US are going to co-chair 2 of them, but the idea here is to get everyone involved.
Well, Ambassador, you mentioned—
I maybe didn't mention security and defense. And, you know, usually that would be the first thing to be mentioned in such a working group capacity. But on the bilateral level, General, what I found was we signed the first defense agreement with the Israelis as an Arab state. And that really shifted the way in which Israelis interact with us and others in the region. We had a visit by a senior National Security Council official, and in his visit to the Fifth Fleet, there was an Israeli counterpart that was there as well. By signing that agreement, we have an IDF officer in Bahrain. We have seen multiple joint exercises in the region, and we're hopeful that that will help us secure the region in a different way that was not possible before the Accords.
You know, Ambassador, Americans a lot of times, because of the difficulties in the region, view the Middle East as just a mess to be avoided, right? You often hear these arguments about, about pivoting away from the Middle East or disengaging as an unmitigated good. But I think what you're talking about are some examples of how U.S. engagement in the region can play a productive role in helping countries in the region go after their own problems and to exploit their own opportunities. And you mentioned a lot of these areas, energy security as one of them. And of course, we've seen in the war in Ukraine, the brutal invasion of Ukraine, and I'm sure that has resonated quite strongly with Bahrain, a brutal invasion of a smaller country in terms of population and so forth by a much larger neighbor, and the effects that it's had really on energy security, on food security, and so problems that develop in the Middle East or in the Black Sea region, don't stay there, right? They reverberate, and I wonder if you might share with with our viewers, why it's important for the what do you see as the U.S. role as a partner of Bahrain, but also in the Middle East more broadly?
Well, General, I think that this is much bigger than just security. I mean, we all understand the significance of the U.S. presence in the region and its direct effect on securing energy prices, global energy prices. And what we've seen over time is that with the formation of multiple coalitions, there's a bigger sharing of that burden, which is an opportunity for us to work with like-minded countries to protect the region and to protect the world. Basically, you have someone that goes out, fills up his tank of gas, and because of some drone attacks in the Arabian Gulf, you might have, a different price to pay. So it's still, I think, is a very important region in terms of that. But also, it's important for the U.S. to continue because we have seen the effects on our peoples. I mean, the next generation that are growing up now, they've been educated here in the U.S. They have ties with folks here in the U.S. The business community has ties with folks in the U.S. And so this all comes together, and it presents itself with an opportunity for peoples to grow closer together. And the danger is any pivot out of the region is going to create a void, and that void is going to be filled with others that might look at the region with an opportunistic view. Yeah, we've aligned ourselves a very long time ago, and we hope to see a continuation in it. So what we will do is we will continue to come up with innovative ideas to make things work, whether it's in the private sector, where not only have we signed this free trade agreement back in 2004, but we've also dedicated a plot of land for U.S. businesses only to set up shop and make it easier for them to sell their products and manufacture their products in the region. We only have one free trade zone, and it's dedicated for U.S. businesses only. These initiatives that give U.S. companies or U.S. entities a competitive edge over others should really be highlighted, and this becomes part of this relationship that we have built for many years.
Ambassador, of course, your country in the Middle East remains very important in terms of energy security. You've already mentioned this, and you mentioned obviously the focus on a clean energy transition. But it's worth pointing out that global energy demands will increase by 50% by the year 2050, and the estimates are that only about 28% of that increased demand can be covered by renewables. So natural gas and oil exports are going to remain very important. And I'd like just to ask, really what your vision is, Bahrain's vision in terms of investments in energy infrastructure to meet that demand in the long term, but also in the short term. Do you see Bahrain and OPEC broadly doing more to meet the increased demand for energy, especially in light of the crisis in Ukraine and the degree to which that's constrained global energy supplies?
Ever since the war in Ukraine, we've realized how important energy security is, and that was probably when I earlier talked about the dimensions of security. That was one of the areas that we've organized the IISS Manama Dialogue for 18 years now, and we have never heard the context of energy security the way we did this year. So it's very evident that countries that look for stability are looking at ways in which they can maximize their relations with countries that they can depend on in terms of securing those energy requirements. And it continues to showcase how important the Middle East is. So what we have done is, through the leadership of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, who has been keen on participating in COP27, COP26, we've announced our goals, and we will continue to seek those goals that have been embedded into our Economic Vision 2030. That will require us to do two things in parallel. We have to look at ways in which we can maximize raw materials that we are blessed to have either on or offshore in terms of oil and gas. As an ambassador here in Washington, D.C., my priority is to get U.S. companies involved as soon as possible. We know that the technology lies here in the U.S., and so we're trying our best to get those investments up and running. But at the same time, we look at our announced commitments, and we look at ways in which our government can get to those goals the same way many of the other governments are doing in terms of carbon capture technology and other ways as well. So we'll do those two things in parallel, and we'll continue to work with like-minded countries to get to those goals.
Ambassador, the last question I'd like to ask you, you already alluded to it. You said that if the United States disengages from the Middle East and creates a vacuum, somebody will fill it. I think that's those somebodies include Russia. And of course, it's worth pointing out at this stage that Iran is supporting Russia's brutal war in Ukraine with the sale of drones and maybe even missiles, and Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps expertise in assembling and employing those drones. And China, who is actually thrown a lifeline to the Iranian regime multiple times in terms of purchasing oil exports beyond the limit associated with UN sanctions and so forth, and a lot of cooperation on missiles that I think is generally known. And so, what are your concerns about Russia and China's role in the region? How have you seen it change over time? And what's your prediction for the future for Chinese and Russian designs? What do they want in the region? And is their influence growing, or is it diminished now after the invasion of Ukraine?
I think that all the countries in the region have relations with both China and Russia. We will continue to have those relations. But at the same time, when we look a little bit deeper into the quality of the relations and compare them with other relationships that we have built over time, we might see some discrepancies, we might see some differences. And so, for a country that has invested a lot in its relationship with the US, pivoting to other relationships becomes very expensive. And so we value the relationship with the US. We will continue down that path while still maintaining our relations with other countries from around the world. But at the end of the day, we look at our national security interests, and we look at all what's happening, and with examples that might hurt our national security interests, we'll draw some red lines. So we're very careful in our international relationships, and we're very cognizant of the fact that Bahraini security comes first, and we double down on relations that have been built over a consistent amount of time, and we've seen prosperity out of those relationships.
Well, Ambassador, I can't thank you enough for joining us to help us understand better Bahrain's perspective. And we've shown in the intro the map. And I think when you look at the map and you see where Bahrain is situated, there's no better vantage point than to look northeast, south, or west to help us understand the region from an invaluable ally and from a tremendous perspective. And the purpose of this series is to help generate strategic empathy, to view complex challenges and opportunities from the perspective of others. And you've certainly fulfilled that for us. And I'd like just to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to say to our viewers before we wrap up here?
Again, General, thank you for the opportunity. I think that maybe on a final note, I'd like to leave off on this idea. You know, when we look at countries in the region, we look at countries that know the US. And when I say they know the US, I don't mean language, I mean culture. Because at the end of the day, that's what brings people together. If we understand one another better, we'll get to better terms, we'll get to better outcomes. And that has really helped us over time. That has helped us create a very stable foreign policy towards the US that has made the lives of all the ambassadors that were posted to the US from Bahrain much, much easier because of that alignment. And so at a time when governments around the world are reshifting their priorities, they're looking at ways to build new relations or invest more in old relationships, you see some success stories, and you need to highlight those success stories and build upon them for the benefit of all. And I think we've proven that point, and we're very happy and grateful for this very long and rich relationship.
Well, Ambassador Abdullah Khalifa, on behalf of the Hoover Institution, shukran. Thank you for helping us learn more about Battlegrounds, important to our future, to our security, and to our prosperity. It's been great to see you again, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, General.
Battlegrounds is a production of the Hoover Institution, where we advance ideas that define a free society. For more information about our work, to hear more of our podcasts, or view our video content, please visit hoover.org.